And when I say hitting the bullseye, I mean really, can we, make a movie that really that the budget, equals or exceed, that the worldwide value of the movie has to equal or exceed the budget. And that's really, at the end of the day, what we're all trying to strive for. And it's not an exact science, unfortunately. We all try and use whatever means and methods we have at our disposal, whether it's someone says, okay, I have a Nicolas Cage action movie. Yes, it's very easy to go back and try and figure out what the last, I think he likes to make a lot of movies, the last 30 Nicolas Cage movies have actually done in a specific territory. So yes, you can actually do some analysis on something like that. But there are situations where it is very difficult to do an analysis, and you have to just try and do as much homework as you can. And it's really, you have to be really cognizant of what's really happening in each of these markets. I mean, for me, and I'm sure for Milan and everybody, I'm watching international box office results every week from every country of the world. So I kind of know, I'm paying attention, or should be paying attention to actually what's working in all of these territories around the world. I mean, you have a movie which I'm still astonished by, The Untouchables, which is literally the biggest movie. I think everyone know what I'm talking about, the French movie, The Untouchables? So this movie, whether in Europe and especially in Germany, was the biggest movie in Germany of the year. And you have to pay attention to these things, and you have to sort of, try and figure out what is going to work and what is going to work on a macro level.
There's a movie that I'll give as an example that I didn't work on or have anything to do with, so take it with a grain of salt. But look at a movie like Bachelorette, which is sort of an American independent comedy, similar to what we do at Big Beach, that fascinates me because this is a movie that has a great cast. I think it was Elle Driver and Wild Bunch sold foreign on this, but with Kristen Dunst, Isla Fisher, Lizzie Kaplan. They were at the budget, whatever it is, a few $1 million. They were able to go out and cover the sort of the negative on that movie just in foreign. So they would take that movie back to Sundance, sell domestic on that, and that's all upside for them. Then, as you follow that, I think that movie's innovative in that regard because it really is a specific American comedy that is being covered off of foreign pre-sales. But then, if you follow that all the way through its trajectory to the distribution, that's another movie that's really taking advantage of the sort of iTunes VOD, Ultra VOD platform. It's coming out 3 weeks before it's coming out in the theaters. It grossed $500,000 on VOD in its first weekend. I think that's a movie to look at as a North American producer and say, okay, they did something innovative there, and that's something as a producer I'm looking at and saying, who can I cast that has foreign value in these smaller indie comedies that I can come back to Sundance or Toronto and know that I've got most of it covered.
You come up with that answer, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I think just to give them credit, it's the Weinstein Company's new Radius label.
Radius did it.
That's
yeah.
doing Bachelorette. That's done the sort of innovative launch of that.
But Jerry, to your point, like you'll see, I think some of these foreign sales companies will then give a producer like, here's your cast list. If you can cast A, B, or C out of this list, this equals X amount of money. And I can't speak to whatever that Q value is or what but having somebody that works at a foreign sales company that you can go to and say, here's who I'm looking, here's my 10 people that I want to cast in this movie. Is there any value there? And I mean, that's a starting point.
And the thing to remember too is that the sales company's not there to tell you what movie to make. They're there to give you information and advice on what it means if you put one of these elements in there. You might want to make the small version of a movie with a Mark Ruffalo instead of doing the huge version of the movie with Bradley Cooper. It's there to give you guidance and say, this is the movie I want to make. Well, this is what the value is, and you've got to sort of scale your expectations appropriately so that they're there working for you. It's your movie, and sometimes sort of the reality is a little stark and surprising in terms of what those numbers can end up with different levels of cast. But ultimately, you get to make whatever movie you want to make.
Well, let me put it sort of another way. So we get submissions, as all of our sales, we all do. We get submissions from people, and they go, so the first question we ask, here's the package, here's the script, here's the director, here's the cast. And the next question I ask is, okay, so what's the budget? And so I'm just making this up. The budget's $12 million, okay. So then we go back and do a little homework, do our evaluation, and again, a lot of this is not scientific. And then we go back and we go, okay, great, you want to make a $12 million movie, you should make it for 6 or don't make it at all. And producers go, well, what do you mean you make it for 6? The budget's 12. And I go, well, you need to make it for 6 okay, or don't make it because the math doesn't work. Okay, and then what usually ends up happening, then we'll get another call back. Okay, well, we've got the budget now down to 10. And I'm going, no, make it for 6 or don't make it at all, okay? Okay, we'll call you back. Okay. We've got the budget down to 8. No, make it for 6 or don't make it at all. And then what usually ends up happening is everyone figures out a way to make it for 6. Okay, and the movie goes. And I think it's a really important analysis that you do need to look to the foreign sales agent. You do need to look to these, call them, people that seemingly know what they're talking about, to really get an idea of what is the right price point for this movie. And that's what this is about. It's your price point.
Speaking of price points, I want to talk a little bit more about the low budget end of the spectrum, and obviously the risk-reward balance is a little different there. You can maybe take punts on more films per year in the hopes that you get a bigger upside with one of them that can kind of balance out. I mean, what's the thinking of how much you can do or how differently you're going to work than Big Beach?
Well, I mean, I think it all has to do with the amount of revenue that's coming back on film in general, right? And so we're seeing the collapse of the DVD market, and there's just less revenue to be had, period, on film. So you've seen, we're just looking at the domestic market, sales at Sundance, for example, which is kind of like 12 o'clock on our dial. Everything we make over the course of the year, we generally take to Sundance and sell. We sold them with Sunshine back in 2006, I think it was, for $10.5 million to Fox Searchlight, which at the time, I think it still is the highest sale. But, then the next year the highest sale was $8 million. Then after that it was $6 million. We sold Already Brother for 4 something. So it's been shrinking. So as a response to that, we figured, look, we want to keep making the movies with the same sort of creative integrity that we have been. We just need to respond, and by doing that, we're working with first-time filmmakers. We're shooting films in 18 days, 24 days. We're working in Seattle. We're working in New York, who has a 30% incentive. And yes, it allows us to make more movies. You have, there's obviously more upside, and you need to find talent that's willing to sort of take a pay cut, that wants to work for scale. These are movies where nobody's getting rich. You're giving the talent a piece of the back end, and you're giving them an opportunity to raise their profile. Safety Not Guaranteed is a good example of a movie with 3 television actors who were looking for the right film role to step into. They embraced the movie. We went up to Seattle. We slept in this motel. It was like camp. And but ultimately, everyone was satisfied at the end of it, and the movie did well. I think it's nearing $4 million at domestic box office, and if we can repeat that, that's sort of the goal of this business, is to sort of repeat that.
But that same filmmaker, let's say, if he's going on to his 2nd and 3rd and 4th films, he doesn't want to do it like he's at camp anymore. So what happens?
So for example, Colin Trevorrow and Derek Connolly, who wrote and directed Safety Not Guaranteed, we now have a movie called Ambassadors that's at Big Beach, which is a bigger budget film. So in some regards, Beachside is set up to be, I don't want to call it minor leagues, but we are a training ground. We want to work with these young directors, make their first films. If they have larger films that they want to make, we can do that at Big Beach. We look at a movie like Francis Ha, Noah Baumbach's movies that's here. You're finding a lot of directors now who have a great career, but are just frustrated. They're waiting around to see if they can get the right talent that's going to justify making that $6 to $8 million movie that Jerry's talking about, and it's not happening. They're saying, well, I just want to go make this with my friends. Can I raise $700,000? David Gordon Green's got one movie in the can called Prince Avalanche that did with Paul Rudd and Emile Hirsch. He's got another movie that was just announced, I think, in screen with Nick Nolte. I'm sorry, with Nick Cage. You're seeing these other directors sort of taking a step down in budget to make their movies, and we want to be there to help support that.
I think even Joss Whedon's got a film he shot here in a week or something, and along that model.
Right.
You guys are talking about the lower budget end of what you work with, or can you work with new directors and sell their films successfully? It's tough.
Again, it really depends on what the movie is. Generally, I mean, one of the things that we get asked to pre-sell sometimes of very small movies, and when you're pre-selling, you're doing 2 things. One, you're you're mitigating your downside, but you're also limiting your upside. You are selling in advance to make the movie, and frankly, sometimes the smaller the movies get, that pre-sales, if you're looking at the risk profile of a movie, might not make sense. So below a certain size, like you were saying before, I just think, get as much soft money as you can, as you were saying, and then it may just make more sense to make the movie if you really want upside to make it, because if you pluck off a couple territories for 50,000 here and 75,000 there, it might not make sense to give up that upside. It's an economic trade-off between the two. So a lot of times we'll get a movie and say, hey, look, this is fantastic, we like this, we'll commit to selling, but we won't bring it to market until the movie's finished. Making movies with first-time filmmakers, absolutely. Again, if they have a vision that they can communicate, sometimes that's with a sizzle reel, sometimes with a vision statement, sometimes you bring them to the room. If you're agreeing to sell one of those movies, it's because you see something there. You're not saying, hey, I like the script and I don't know what the director's going to do with it, but let's go sell it. But you can make substantively budgeted movies. We've done some of them as well, and as long as you can communicate to buyers what this movie will be and why this person is going to do something great with it, I think there's value there. You're probably not going to be making a $30 million movie with a first-time filmmaker, but if you're making a $6 to $8 million movie, absolutely.
And you guys don't work so much with first-timers, I don't think, or not right now?
First-time directors are challenging, there's no doubt. Not that they're any more or less qualified, but again, it's all about the pre-sale business. And every time we get a submission, and it's a first-time director, of course. Oh, Jerry, he's done music videos, and he's done 1,800 commercials, and he won 3 different short film festivals, and that's all good, and that's all fine. But I mean, we have to communicate that to our buyers around the world. And depending upon, and Milan's right, depending upon the price point, again, it all backs into the price point. If you're going to make a movie under $5 million, and it's a really interesting piece of material, and this first-time filmmaker was able to maybe really corral, an interesting piece of cast or two, and there's a steady producer on board. Yes, we'll bring the director in, we'll have him meet with buyers, but again, it's a very time-consuming process. And one thing that's what's not being said here is that all of us who are meeting with buyers, especially at markets, we have a half hour to meet with a buyer. And we have a slate of movies that everyone is trying to pitch new movies that are now on market 2, market 3, and you really only have a limited amount of bandwidth when you have a buyer in front of you for a period of time. So you have to be judicious in terms of what movies you are going to take on to really bring and launch to the international marketplace.
Thank you. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what is working, the good news. What's working, what's selling well,
there's a lot of good news.
Responding?
Okay, and there's really a lot of good news. Little movies, medium-sized movies, they are working. And I think it's really important that, and I'm sure for us and everybody, for us, it's really about the material. It starts with the material, and the material has got to be something that, when a buyer is reading, when I'm reading these on submissions, I'm reading them thinking, okay, what is a buyer in Germany, France, wherever, reading this, going to feel and think? Because I was a buyer most of my life as opposed to a seller. And so I sort of try and put a focus in terms of what is a buyer going to perceive when they're reading this. Now, unfortunately, and people use this example, we're not going to be, launching an American football movie overseas. We're just not. We're not going to be launching a hockey movie overseas. Unfortunately, African American movies overseas are challenging, and that's just, and there's nothing any of us can do about it. They just are. So there's a number, black and white movies, unless it's an auteur director, are challenging. But, it just really depends on what it is that you're trying to do and how you're going to go about doing it.
I completely agree with that. And we talked about, one of the things we talked about before coming up here, sort of, let's talk about trends and what's happening. I mean, one of the trends that we're seeing a little bit that feeds back into this question a little is, it used to be a few years back where you could say, okay, genre movies are working. And everyone would go and just make a bunch of genre movies because it was, at that time, you had like a few years steady where they were constantly printing money. And I think what we're seeing in the market now is that the oscillations between kind of likes what's working and what's not is going so much faster, and you don't know, what's going to be crowded when it drops out quickly, that the market's doing this a little bit. So timing it from a perspective of, I'm going to go out there and make a movie that's going to hit that is a really difficult thing, and it's not the approach to making films if you really want to be successful. It's do I have something great? What do people want to see? What will get them out of their houses into a movie theater? And I know it sounds completely generic and kind of obvious, but is this something special? Because it backs into, if you're a buyer in the room and you're looking at something, it's going to come out 12 months, 18 months later. You can't be timing it on what's working right now. And if you have a great piece of material and a great filmmaker and it's interesting and unique in some way, that's what works. Whether it's a low-budget movie, a mid-budget movie, a high-budget movie, is there a value proposition here? But trying to time it, because it's what you think people will want to buy. It's not about what you can get the sales agent to sell. It's about what will people distribute and make money off of 18 months later, 24 months later. And that's why it's really about the movie and not about the sell.
Yeah, I mean, to build off what Milan's saying, I think that what I would encourage you guys as filmmakers to do is make what you know and not think so analytically about it. I mean, think intelligently about it, but not think so analytically about it that, oh, I need to make a an action movie that I can put guns on the, look at a movie like Beasts of the Southern Wild, which by all rights, there's no concept to that movie. It's an experimental movie, but it's a beautiful film. Here it is now, what, $8-9 million at the domestic box office, where you've got genre films that are not doing that well. So if you're, as a filmmaker, if it's something that you believe in, that you have the passion to tell this story and tell it well, I would encourage that rather than saying, well, I really need to get the Jason Statham movie off the ground because I think that's how I'm going to pay my bills. I think the long run is, to make what you believe in.
Are there too many movies in the market right now? Big question.
It's interesting you bringing this up because I was just having this conversation with somebody. There was a period of time, and I can't believe if it was 08, 09. In fact, there's been 2 periods of time when there was a significant glut of independently financed movies. There was so much German tax shelter money around, and there were so many movies being made. And, and the international markets became depressed based upon, the meltdown in 08. And there were just too many movies around. And it took some time for the movies to work their way through the system. And what we're seeing today is, I think there is a significant amount of money around to make movies. And there's money coming from all different sources from all over the world. And we hope, that this isn't going to end up, in a year and a half from now or 2 years from now, we're having the same issue where now there's just too many movies. But what I do think is there is a correction here. I think what's happening a little bit too is you now have most, if not all, major movie stars willing to be in independent pictures, which I think is a little different than it was, let's call it 4, 5, 6 years ago. The independent space is now a space that is widely recognized. Agencies who had little divisions in this space, it's now all the agencies and all these agents in these agencies understand this space. And then you have the issue that, the movies between 25, and again, a lot of people are in this room, this may not be relevant, but this $25 to $65 million space, which the studios have abandoned, is now really, for like a Film Nation and for us, is a really very lucrative area.
Milan, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I was just having like a nightmare moment where I was thinking about, you were talking about that period of time where there were too many movies. My previous job was at a company called Samuel's Media, and we financed 2 movies. One was Michael Clayton and one was In the Valley of Allah, and they both came out within a 1-month window against like We Own the Night, Into the Wild, The Brave One. I mean, there was 9 movies that were targeting the exact same audience opening on a 4-week stretch. I mean, it was that was too many movies. I don't think we're anywhere close to that because there has been a correction. But I think it comes in. I mean, there are definitely periods where you're looking at trying to sort of date a movie, and you can see that there's, a season or a stretch of weeks where it's crowded. But I still think there's plenty of room. But I will say there are times where we look at the calendar when we say, wow, there isn't a great movie. There isn't a great date to actually put this in the theaters. We'd rather wait until the spring. but I agree with Jerry that it's not really kind of like what it was 5 years ago, where there's just too many movies made and you're kind of preparing for a correction.